We will now talk about our final book of the semester. Jean-Paul Sartre's Existentialism is a Humanism. The first major tenet of Sartre's philosophy is the statement, existence precedes essence. So, what does that mean? This means that one first exists and then begins the project of defining what one is. Atheistic existentialism, of which Jean-Paul Sartre is a representative, declares with great consistency that if God does not exist, and he is an atheist, there is at least one being whose existence comes before its essence, a being which exists before it can be defined by any conception of it. That being is man, or the human reality. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. This is the first principle of existentialism, and this is what people call its subjectivity. So, to step back a second, going all the way back to Plato, the essence of what it meant to be human existed before a particular human did. Sort of like beauty itself exists prior to a beautiful experience. So the form or ideal version of something is prior to our particular experiences of that something. Now, this of course depended upon God existing, that there was such a thing as beauty itself or human being itself, that there was some objective truth to the world, some essential truth to the world, that there was a meaning behind life that we could discover. Now, once you deny God's existence, all of that is gone, which means there is no meaning to a human life other than what a subjective individual gives to their own life. So you do not find meaning. What is the meaning of life for an atheist is an absurd question, because all meaning is given to life by the subject, not found in life objectively. This is what Sartre means by existence precedes essence, that we exist and then we define ourselves subjectively after we start existing. There's no meaning for why we exist or why we're here or even what we're supposed to be doing, any purpose to our life. Instead, whatever purpose we give, or how about this, whatever purpose we find in our life, we gave it to ourselves. It's not destined for us by God or by anything else. This is what Sartre means by existence precedes essence. One implication of this is personal responsibility. Responsibility can mean a lot of different things. What we mean by it here is the ability to answer for oneself. So Sartre argues that everyone has a profound responsibility. The first effect of existentialism is that it puts every man in possession of himself as he is, and places the entire responsibility for his shoulders, for his existence, squarely upon his own shoulders. So whatever you are nothing but the product of your own choices. In other words, every individual has to answer for what they themselves become over the course of their lives. Now, that sounds pretty good, actually, right? Existentialism was highly criticized for being a selfish, egoistic philosophy. Sartre's trying to show that it's the opposite. When we say that man is responsible for himself, we do not mean that he is responsible only for his own individuality, but that in a way he has to answer for all men. What does that mean? This is going to be Sartre's attempt to build an ethics, to sort of give a a vision of what a good life might look like? Or how about this? Someone who uses their responsibility well. When we say that man chooses himself, we do mean that every one of us must choose. But by that we also mean that in choosing for himself, a person chooses for everyone. For in effect, of all the actions a man may take in order to create himself as he wills to be, there is not one which is not creative at the same time of an image of mankind, such as he individually believes mankind ought to be. To choose between this or that is at the same time to affirm the value of that which is chosen, and we are never able to choose the worse. What we choose is always the better, or at least our perception of it, right? And nothing can be better for us unless it is better for all. I am thus responsible for myself and for all men, and I am creating a certain image of man as I would have him be. In fashioning myself, I fashion mankind. What Sartre is trying to do is that he's denied God's existence, and yet, as a Nazi war camp survivor, he's trying to figure out a reason for why some things are right or wrong. So instead of just saying it's a free-for-all where everybody can do whatever they want, which is what a lot of people believe if God doesn't exist, he's trying to say that you can construct some version of morality out of this. Because we are now the creators of good and evil, since there is no God to create them. So God did not give them to Moses or to whatever. There's no Platonic goodness itself by which to measure our actions against. There's no ruler or standard of goodness that we can use as a guide. There's no compass. Instead, we create good and evil. And so what he's saying here is that whenever I say any action is good for me, I'm a human being, which means I'm inserting that value into the world as being good for humans. And whenever I say any action is bad for me, I'm a human being, which means I'm inserting that value judgment of bad onto that action into the world for others to see as well. So I think what he says is, only act in such a way that, sort of like Kant would say, that you want your action to be set up as a role model for other people to follow. Because that's exactly what your actions are. Since we are creators of good and evil, we are all inserting good and evil into the world. Only act in such a way that we can be proud of what we're doing. Seems to be the positive spin he tries to put upon this. Now, many people criticize this as being an incredibly weak version of ethics. That it is actually selfish and egoistic, despite Sartre's attempt to say that it's not. Now, even though we are now responsible, and as Sartre says, free from the idea of God, that doesn't come without some sort of consequences. Sartre says that there are three emotions human beings inevitably feel as the result of their own responsibility for themselves. And these are anguish, abandonment, and despair. Now, how does Sartre understand human anguish? Now, anguish and anxiety are related terms for him. He says that once we realize that God doesn't exist, we become responsible for the meaning of our own lives. And we are going to be forced to make decisions about things. It's not a choice. It's not a choice to make a choice, in other words. Life will put us in situations where we're either going to have to act or not act. In either one of those, we bear responsibility for our own action or inaction. Here's the thing. We have to make actions. But since God doesn't exist, since there's no standard of goodness by which to judge what is right, we are forced to make actions about what is right without having knowledge of what is right. Sartre says that the necessity to make decisions about good and evil while being divorced from knowledge of good and evil results in a permanent state of anguish and anxiety for human beings. Now, what I would think that you would find interesting is that, compare this to Boethius. Boethius argued that the only cure for anxiety was the belief in providence, that everything happens for a reason, that there was no cure for anxiety unless there's a higher power organizing things to ultimately end up being towards the good. Sartre, as an atheist, agrees with Boethius. The only cure for human anxiety was God, but God doesn't exist. Therefore, there is no cure for human anxiety. And that's pretty dark. This is why some people refer to existentialism as a kind of depressing, dark philosophy. Because anxiety, abandonment, and despair become permanent aspects of the human experience once God doesn't exist and once individuals become responsible for constructing the meaning of their own existence, trying to give themselves purpose, and saying that that purpose is somehow good, even though goodness itself does not exist. So Sartre talks a little bit about the story of Abraham. Existentialists state that man is in anguish. What does that mean? When a man commits himself to anything, fully realizing that he is not only choosing what he will be, but is thereby at the same time a legislator deciding for the whole of mankind. In such a moment, a man cannot escape from the sense of complete and profound responsibility. With great responsibility comes great anguish and anxiety. And I think that's an idea that many of you could probably connect to. The more responsibilities you have, whether it's towards families or career, or towards your own personal destiny, the more anxiety and anguish you have about those things as well. They're inseparable. You can't take away responsibility for one's destiny. Or how about this? You can't say one is responsible for one's own destiny and say that they aren't anxious about what that destiny becomes. Now, we would not have anxiety if we had some metaphysical compass all of the time that told us what to do, because all of our anxiety stems from us having to make a decision about good and evil without understanding objectively what good and evil are. So I have to make a decision about moral questions without knowing whether or not my decision is actually good. But at the same time, when I make a decision, I insert that decision in the world for other people to look at and to follow. We are responsible for ourselves, for Sartre, and we are responsible for creating morality, or at least versions of it for other people to view and judge. And he says that a permanent sense of anguish is what human beings live in once they realize they are responsible for their own meaning to life.